Hi, I'm Paul Mitchell, the Managing Director of the Human Enterprise. Well, first of all, welcome to our series on transformational leadership. Over the next 12 months, I'll be having informal one-on-one chats with some of the Asia Pacific's top leaders. We'll be talking with business leaders, community leaders, and people from the arts and sport. You're going to hear some amazing people tell some amazing stories. You'll personally get the opportunity to hear firsthand tips and ideas such as what does leadership mean to these people? How have they made the transition from technician to manager to leader? How, with everything on their plates, do they manage to keep their work-life balance? How importantly do they develop the leaders around them so they really are leaving a legacy much more than just the business result? And currently, and particularly important, what are they doing to steer their organisations through our current economic seas of uncertainty? Today we have got the absolute privilege of hearing from Andrew Reeves. Andrew is the Managing Director of the alcoholic beverage giant Lion Nathan. It's a name that some of you will know and some of you won't, but I guarantee you'll know the brands, and I'll leave Andrew to talk about those. It is a company that boasts many iconic brands, and I'm sure you'll even find some of them in your fridge or your wine rack. Well, welcome, Andrew. How are you today?
Really good, Paul.
That's the way. So, Andrew, just tell me a little bit about, or tell our listeners a little bit about what your current role is and how long you've been involved with that role.
Yeah, so currently I'm the Managing Director for Lion Nathan Australia, which is one of Australia's largest alcoholic beverages companies, and principally involved in beer. And I've been in the role since August of 2002, so that's a little over 6 years.
Okay, and quite heavily involved, as most of our listeners will know, on a fairly strong acquisition path at the moment. How's that going for you?
Yeah, well, it's been up and down. I mean, we've like all business been looking for new growth paths, so we've had some successes, and we acquired the Bogues business late in 2007, which has been a great acquisition for us. But a couple of other areas we've branched out in and been quite bold, but unfortunately haven't come off at this stage.
Some recent ones. Now, what about some of your brands? Because although you know them very, very well, what are some of the brands?
Yeah, I doubt whether too many people know who Lion Nathan is, because you don't actually. It's hard to buy Lion Nathan other than just if you're buying shares. But largely, our brands revolve around three key trademarks: Tui's, Forex, and Han. And so they're our big trademarks, and we also have long-term investments and licensing arrangements with a couple of big global brewers in Heineken and AB InBev and the Beck's brand.
Right, so a very, very diverse portfolio there.
Yeah.
So what about you? Give us a bit of a feel for your career to date. You've been in this business for, what, 6 years?
So, I mean, I guess I've been working professionally now for 30 years, started in late 70s. So it's a long time. I'm probably closer to the end of my career than I am to the beginning of it.
You're only just beginning.
Yeah, but hopefully I've not stopped learning. I guess principally it's been in fast-moving consumer goods, all in Australia, although I've worked for large international organisations, Kimberly-Clark, at Amatil, in the snack food business, and then the beverage business, and then clearly here at the Lion Nathan.
Okay, so thank you. So quite a diverse portfolio, but pretty much a lot, I guess, focused on fast-moving consumer goods. Yeah. So getting to the heart of it, which is what this leadership series is about, what does leadership mean to you? I mean, you've certainly done everywhere you've been. You have helped transform people and transform the business. So it's a bold question, but what does leadership mean?
Yeah, it's a toughie because it's such a big topic. And there's so much written and said about it. Look, the way I deal with answering that question is when I talk to people in the business about that, is what's leadership all about. I try and draw a comparison between two often confused concepts, leadership and management, and to try and tease this out. To me, management is a very important function, really crucial, but it's about optimising the status quo. It's how do we make the best of what we've currently got and our circumstances, and absolutely drive that as hard and as fast as we can. And the product of management is efficiency.
Right.
When I then talk about leadership is, to me, is much more about the challenges and the demands and the complexities of change and transformation. Much more creative process, dealing with new circumstances, complex new problems, solutions focused. And I think about the product of leadership is the discretionary effort of the people in the organisation.
Okay.
And so that's how so one's more about changing, moving to new circumstances, taking the business to a new place, and that's what I think really separates the two, and hopefully helps people understand the importance of the.
I like the outcomes there, because I guess as a manufacturing and strong marketing business, it is about efficiency. But the word, what comes up for me, that second part, is energy. It's really about the mobilisation of energy of your people. That's that second part.
Yeah, because without their enthusiastic commitment to what you're doing, and they won't throw all their energy, all their passion, all their best ideas, like you do with anything you're enthusiastic about in life, you give it everything.
Well, so looking at that then, pace of the leader, pace of the pack, if you're there to energise and to get that discretionary effort, people doing that little bit extra and thinking about what else can they do, how else can they break through, how do you keep your energy up? Because people, obviously, they're going to look at you for that, and other leaders in the business.
Yeah, and I guess you've always got to worry about your own sense of renewal and your own sense of pace, so I personally enjoy change. I enjoy.
You thrive on it.
I do. I enjoy changing environments. And I am energised by that, and I enjoy the challenge that comes with that. I do try and stay on top of my own development, my own learning, and I guess at this stage in my career, that's a lot more self-directed than it is from either company support and what have you. But that's good, and I try and I've learnt to actually engage in things outside of work these days, which actually I find a good break, a good respite, but also gives me a lot more energy when I come back into the workplace.
That's a great thing. We were talking, one of our sayings in the human enterprise is leaders are learners, and it's not necessarily learning about the business, it's just learning for learning's sake. Can you tell us what your current passion is? Because it's fantastic that you're doing something so removed from
well,
the business.
It is, in fact, and I have to thank my wife for this, because I think there was a period in my career, a long period in my career, most of those 30 years, where I ran the risk of being defined only by my job, and I think that's not a great place to be, frankly. And she came home one night some years ago and said to me, there's this great course at the Art Gallery of New South Wales on Renaissance art. And I looked at it blankly and said, why would I be remotely interested in such an arcane subject as that? Anyway, she eventually, through conspiring with my PA at the time, blocked this time out once a week in my diary to go to the Art Gallery of New South Wales to these lectures. It was a revelation. It's one of the most thrilling and exciting learning experiences I've ever had. And I've always had a real interest in history. But when you marry history with art, and art doesn't take place in a vacuum, it takes place in a political, social, economic context. Yeah. It was just fascinating. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I have spent in that time just exploring this field more and more, reading, visiting galleries, trying to soak up information about it, and it's just I found it incredibly fascinating subject. The parallels for business, by the way, are quite extraordinary.
Can you give us an example? At least there's maybe one example.
I'll try and do this quickly, but I think one of the great examples is the rise of the Impressionist artists. Art up until the late 18th century, when they emerged, had been the same for thousands of years. You can actually see the same themes, the same drivers, the same mores and rules had been in place since the ancient Greeks and Romans, and been reinvented by the Renaissance artists, and had become the norm. And they absolutely broke the mold. They did everything completely in a revolutionary fashion. And it's interesting that I look at that in terms of, hey, we look at our markets, they can be very stable, our environment's very stable, but they can be turned on their heads by innovation, by discontinuities, by change in circumstances, and what you feel is stable and what is really secure can just end overnight. And in fact, in a period of, it may sound like a long time now, but over 10 or 15 years, they have had an impact on the development of art, since that time, that has radically changed it for the thousands of years that went before. So that was just one small example.
Mindset of, hey, we live in a world of uncertainty. What can we do to totally question the status quo?
Yeah, and there's an artist who I doubt whether anyone's ever heard of, called Edouard Meissonier, who was the most famous artist of his day in the mid 1800s, and at that time held the record for the highest price a living artist had ever been paid for a painting. I'd say he's a footnote in the text of art history today. And at the same time, names everyone would know: Manet, Monet, Degas, all these sorts of people couldn't sell a painting for £1 cracker in those days. Yet today they sell them for, well, Monet had a painting recently sold in New York for $43 million.
You're giving hope to a lot of rising artists.
Yeah, so now it's just to me that uncertainty how your world can change.
Yeah. So what was it that made him so successful, and how was there some linkages back to business? This is Masonic.
What made him very successful was he played the rules of the market at that time, and he was exceptionally good at playing those rules. Right. Where I guess the new artists were ultimately successful is that they invented a whole new and dynamic and very different approach, which ultimately became very popular. Interestingly enough, they sold it to a new market. They sold it to the Americans. They didn't try and sell it to the market that had been established, which is the European market. Their breakthrough came in the US, and if you think about it at the time, history-wise, the US was emerging then massively entrepreneurial, massively innovative, massively adventurous.
So I get a few things from it. Look for new markets, break the current paradigms of the day, be a leader, which is a dealer in hope. Know that maybe you may not be doing it today, but the legacy you leave for you, because possibly those paintings of Monet and so forth, we know a lot more than Masonic. I can't even remember his name.
And there's probably artists out there today trying to look for a new mould on that.
We've given some hope there. So this gives us a bit of a feel to, you talked about what leadership means to you. It's a tough one in some ways, and maybe others are better at describing it than you, but what's your brand? What's your style? What do you stand for and want to stand for? If people said, hey, what sort of a leader is Andrew Reeves? What would you say?
That's, interesting question. I think there's three things I want my brand to communicate to people, and I should be able to articulate better than this, but those three things would be about strategy, would be about capability, and about people. And they'd be the crucial things that I'd want to really stand for. So really clear strategic choices, really clear strategic direction, being able to mobilise and to bring to bear all the elements of capability that are crucial to execute that strategy, and most of all having the people who are committed to that and are able to drive it.
And can you give us just a quick example, maybe, of each one? An example of a strategy decision you've made, a capability decision you've made, a major people decision that you've made.
So, I mean, this business is a great example, and to me, great strategy is about really clear and explicit choices. You can't do everything. You have to decide where you're going to be really, really good, and where you're going to really focus to be good and differentiated. And this business, because of its history, I mean, beer grew up very parochial, very provincial, very regional. And when I arrived in this business, we were trying to support in excess of 20 different brands.
Wow.
And largely speaking, because every state, every market had its own brand. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working, yet the organisation was highly committed to it and thought that it was a really differentiated strategy. It was differentiated, but it wasn't working. And
in terms of the first thing you talked about, focus and efficiency?
Yeah, focus and efficiency. We were just spreading our energy and our effort across too much and achieving too little. And frankly, we were up against competitors who were more focused and sharper and had a better sense of what they were doing. So look, the strategic decision came to what's the quality of our franchise, and our franchise was very poor. We didn't have a lot of loyalists. We didn't have brands that were growing. We weren't shaping markets. So the big decision was, what in that portfolio, what are the gems, what are the diamonds that we have to really focus on and polish, and to build our future on those diamonds, and that's what we did.
I love the fact you don't just have customers or satisfied customers; you have loyalists.
Loyalists. Oh well, and yes, and that's emotionally great, but it's also economically great.
Yes.
In any business, your loyalists will spend more with you more of the time, more often.
Yeah, and that's what you want. So that's a great example of strategy. One on capability. How did you? Make decisions
so again, to execute that strategy, we had to make a lot of choices about where our resources were, and we said to drive that strategy, there's three things we're going to have to be really good at, and we're going to have to resource. We're going to have to resource those brands, and at the time we weren't actually, even though we had a lot of brands, we weren't spending enough money on them. So we set a target for how much we wanted to spend, and we then had to go and find that. We had to reinvest in our infrastructure because our physical infrastructure wasn't giving us the quality or the responsiveness to drive those brands. So that was brewing infrastructure. We had to find the money and the capability to do that. And we didn't have enough of the right people to execute the strategy that we'd embarked on.
What's very clear here, and a great lesson for every leader, is that capability decisions come from strategy. So many times I see businesses increasing their capability here or whatever, and sometimes not linked to strategy. So you had a very clear line of sight.
And it goes back to my point about what are our clear choices. And if you make those choices, what am I going to major in, what am I going to differentiate in, then I find that the other decisions actually become not easier, but certainly clearer in your mind what it is you've got to do. Yeah.
So that would probably tell me that your people decisions would probably line up with the capability and the strategy too. Can you give an example of one of those that was actually in alignment with the...
Well, we had, a lot of people who were wedded to the past. And one of the things that I guess felt that we had to get people who saw who were more interested in building a new future than defending the past. So there were key roles, and particularly this business being a regional role, there was a lot of historically there had been quite powerful regional jobs.
Yes.
Frankly,
you almost had regional managing directors from it.
It was. They were
head of Forex.
They were regional managing directors, and in fact, and historically they had been full managers of P&L and had the full functional suite of activities, but that had been gradually pared away, but they were still acting like they were managing directors, and they were getting in the way of the effective execution of a large-scale, well-integrated, universal strategy. Yep. And so we had to change those roles and we had to change those people.
So a very clear strategy in terms of choices, and then backing it up with the capability, and then making the tough people calls that are going to make that alignment.
Yeah, and investing in that capability, because we hadn't invested in people capability, and so we had to find the money and the time to make those investments.
Yes, not only have a look at who possibly wasn't right, but who you needed to get in.
Yeah.
So Andrew, you've talked about strategy and capability and people, very, very big strategic roles. I would assume that you weren't always doing that in your career, and at some point you were possibly a technician, an assistant brand manager or whatever.
Yep.
Can you give us a bit of a feel about how you made that transition from being a technician to being a leader? Any tips along the way?
Look, actually, it's interesting you pick on that, Paul, because I often find myself in conversations with people in the organisation referring to this as one of those really critical transition points in your career. And I came into my professional career through marketing. I started off, the absolute bottom of the hierarchy, assistant brand manager, working my way through, basically crunching numbers for other people was what I did. So, and that went well, and eventually got an opportunity to lead a team. And no one had actually defined that for me at the time. There was, at the time, it was almost like, well, you'll just get on and do it, won't you?
Yeah. You're a good technician. You'll make it.
Yeah, that's right. There was an assumption that you're good at that job, so you'll be able to lead people. And there was no formality or structure. You just got thrown in off the deep end. And I'll come on to talk about, I think, how businesses handle that today, which is very different. But this is going back for me 25 odd years. So you were chucked in the deep end. You suddenly had a team of people. And I made all the classic mistakes, overmanaged, micromanaged, didn't know how to delegate, didn't know how to set up clear expectations or manage by performance and focus on outcomes rather than on process. Right.
Because you love to get involved in
it. Yeah, I loved getting involved, and I was doing other people's work, and I'm sure that frustrated them and what have you. Not necessarily being a good coach, not really knowing how to give good feedback, not necessarily being able to do great performance reviews, and all those things which, I know as an individual you want to be done well because you want to learn. And to be honest, I think I learnt by trial and error. And and fortunately, I've enough tolerant people around me to let me make mistakes and get on with it. And it's funny, and I also learnt by watching and observing other people. Funnily enough, at that particular time, I won't talk about who, but I had a boss who I think of very affectionately because he gave me some great opportunities and probably gave me opportunities before I was ready for them and backed me through that. But he was a terrible leader in many respects. And in fact, he was a good role model in the sense that I didn't like a lot of the things he did. And so I said, I don't want people to feel like I feel when he does that.
Isn't that a great, really putting yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, I was thinking, I know how I feel when he behaves in those certain ways, and I don't want my team to have to go through that experience. So I'm going to try and behave differently. So and I watch demonstrated behaviour a lot in people, and I learn a lot from that. It's interesting today in this organisation particularly, we spend a lot of time on this technician to transition management, and we really actively coach and train people through it. And we talk about the derailers, the obvious things that show that where people fall over in moving from a technician to a leader. Micromanagement, lack of delegation, poor team.
All your sins.
All my sins, frankly. And I stand up, talk to people in the organisation about that. Geez, I feel a bit of a hypocrite here because But what we found from research, and the research really interesting, is that if you can point these out to people, they can avoid them, and they'll make that transition so much better. And these things can be learned. Yes, you've got to have some
behaviours.
Yeah, they can be. You've got to have some, the obvious learning agility and the obvious intellect and the experience, what have you. But you can get a much better result from coaching people, and that's something I think is a relatively recent development. And so we're spending a lot of time on that, and I think it's making a really big difference.
This is such an important point. I know we're only halfway through your transition here, in that one of the things we talk about in leadership is a leader is your job is to develop the leaders around you. And incredible that Lion Nathan has a program for not just, now you're in this role, but how do you make that transition? That's excellent.
Yeah, and we start, and the people we bring in there, I think we've started this 3 years ago. And all of the people who go there are still technicians.
Right.
So we're all very early leaders, maybe of a small team. So we're hopefully getting to them very early in that part of their learning curve, and trying to give them a heads up on pitfalls to stay away from, and give them tools and techniques to develop really good leadership skills.
So tell us a bit more then about, you've gone from that's almost up to, say, marketing manager. What about the transition up to director, where you're looking after a whole portfolio, through to general manager, a whole division, through to a whole business?
Yeah, it's at each level we have what we call different leadership capability programs, and they get, I guess, more and more complex, and they start to deal with more and more difficult solutions. And a lot of it is really built on a very straightforward philosophy, which is called behaviour times results.
Yeah,
Results times behaviour. Yes, it is the Ulrich model. Because a lot of people will get a long way in their careers just on results, but those results won't necessarily be sustainable if they don't have really good behaviours to go with them.
Yep.
We can all get a result, 6 months, 12 month, 18 month period, but will that result be sustainable over the long term? So we've spent a lot of time focusing on results are really important, but you've got to get the right behaviours, and we have 10 behaviours that add value that we focus on in the business. So we spend a lot of time, as people start to emerge, on self-awareness, then understanding their own leadership style, how they're seen by others,
right,
all of those types of things, then really developing plans with them, say where there are things they can do better, develop, grow, and enhance their leadership style. Really, actively working on those issues with them, while reinforcing the things that they're great at.
And was there a pivotal point for you when you knew, as Dorothy said, I guess I'm not in Kansas anymore, where you really thought, I'm in a much bigger pond here? Can you ever remember any key learnings or things that you now do as a leader of a much bigger pond?
I think I think as you move into you underestimate the impact you have on the organisation, and
the shadow that you cast.
And you do your behaviour sets up the model for the organisation. But the more senior you get, people look to you, and whether you know it or not, whether you're conscious of it or not,
you're sending messages.
You're sending messages all the time, and people watch what you do; they don't watch what you say.
Yeah.
And the old thing, actions speak louder than words. What you focus on, what you spend time talking about, what you measure, what you reward,
sends out a
big message. So you can talk about all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, you only ever have a really serious conversation about the bottom line, or about this month's result or what have you. Then people think, well, that's what.
I want to drill down. You talked about giving feedback and so forth. That seems to me to be, as I see technicians make that move to manager, to general manager, one of the things they really have to get better at, I believe, is giving feedback to people. You can get some horrific feedback and think, bugger you. You can get some great feedback, even though it may be negative, and think, I'm going to change my behaviour. What works and what doesn't work?
Well, without feedback, you can't learn. You just go straight back to school. When you did your tests and all those sorts of things, without knowing where your proficiency was at, you couldn't adjust and relearn things. So, the feedback is just, it's the life of this whole thing. Then how do you give feedback constructively is really, really crucial. I'm trying to think of good examples here, but really try and get specific with it, using examples for people,
right.
Trying to take real life examples from the workplace, and sort of step through it. If you can, I find, if I'm really, particularly if you're dealing with a difficult issue, good people are easy to give feedback to. They soak it up and they
thank you, off they go.
Yeah, and largely speaking, you're talking about good examples. Where you've got a difficult problem, I find that if you can try and observe real life examples and then bring those back to the discussion and say, okay, look, I saw this happen, I saw you behave this way, let's analyse that, let's try and have a really, really serious conversation about that.
Let's move on to some big influences then. You've talked about that boss that wasn't a good leader and you swore you'd never be like him. What have been some other big leadership influences or lessons in your life that have enabled you to get to where you are today?
Well, I have been fortunate that I've worked in organisations and worked directly for people who I think are really good leaders. So I go back to my point, watching what they do, trying to model that behaviour. So, and I've had some, I've been around and seen some really good people. So that's been great. I think I also tried to look at leadership in other fields of life. I guess one of the great modern leadership examples that stands out for me is Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
And what an amazingly courageous man, what a compassionate man to forgive what he went through. So I just thought the capacity to forgive and to get over it and to move on and build a new bridge to where you're going is an amazing skill.
Enormous.
And I think, and that to me, the day that he turned up, and I'm a real rugby fan, the day that he turned up at the '95 World Cup
and they won.
rugby final, and they won in the jersey of his oppressors, of the uniform and the garb of the
what
people.
A signal. There he was in the jersey.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I mean, I imagine he thought about it, and it was such a simple gesture. But think about the different audiences he was communicating with that one simple message. His own people, about a message of we can embrace these people, we can work with these people, we can live with these people. Sending out an olive branch to the people whose minds he was seeking to persuade. The Afrikaans, the world, sending a message to the world saying, I'm here to build bridges and to build a new country. There just
was a leadership way beyond that event, wasn't it?
Massive leadership statement, and it was such a simple gesture, but so powerful, and the reverberations of it.
How wonderful to think about that, how the simple things can make a big difference. We often talk about culture being three things: behaviour, symbols and processes, and that if ever there was a symbol of hope and leadership to the world, that was it. Other influences, so you get them not just from the corporate world, you're saying. Have there been other mentors or business people or outside of business that have actually given key lessons to make who you are today?
Look, I don't think there's any single individual that I've had. There's been some really great positive influences in my life, family influences, friendships. Just often, in fact, some good friends who aren't in the same business but are in other businesses, have got leadership roles. They're great people to sit down and talk to bounce stuff off and to have a very an unconstrained conversation. They understand what you're going through, understand what your pressures are, but you're not involved in a way that they can't give you objective comment about it.
But they care you, and they care for you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so their friendship, their affection for you is very good. So, it's I've been lucky to have had access to a variety of different people with a variety of different skills who've cared enough about me to give me feedback and to listen to me at different times.
So a couple of keys there: get the feedback, be open to the feedback, and don't just think it has to come through one channel. I guarantee your daughters will give you a lot of feedback. So talk about close relationships. Let's have a look at that. You have a very strong family unit, and relationships are important to you. How do you keep good relationships with your people, yet at the same time push for results? That balance between those two.
Look, it's interesting. I think I get along really well with the people I work with. We enjoy each other's company. We certainly don't talk about work all the time, but we don't socialise a lot either. I mean, I guess I don't actively go looking for friends at work. I know some people actually do, and I wouldn't eschew a friendship if it turned up, and I think I've got good relationships. But I tend to have had my longest and it gets deeper and closer relationships have come away from
outside
work.
of
It just seems to be one of those things. Look, I think it starts really the crucial thing for me is about respect. And it's about, and respect is built on real trust and real confidence in people, and that whole trust about not just their integrity and they tell you the truth and they open and transparent, but about trust in their capability as well. Right. So I think that comes back to the importance of selection in a team. I mean, I think that's really, really crucial. Selecting people who are going to be great at the job you want them to do, are going to bring something new and different to the team, are going to complement the other members of the team, and are going to, when they combine with those other members of the team, hopefully you're going to get a
much better unit.
A much better unit. So I do think a lot about the makeup of the team and the people who are in the team. I'm very clear about expectations. I think one of the things I learned really early on, I think if you really can be upfront with people, really let them know what it is you're trying to achieve in all sorts of areas, and hopefully engage them in the process and buy them into the process, and have them understand their role and contribution in it. That's really great. And I'm a bit of an aim for the stars, clear the hedges sort of bloke. I quite like objectives that are demanding and difficult, because I think it creates new and interesting thinking and pushes people for problem solving. I have to say that more often than not, the people in my teams are much smarter than me. So I think my job is how do I unleash that
harness that
and harness that creativity and that intellect and that skill, and let them go at problems. So I think stretching them and challenging them and really having them feel like when they achieve something it's really worthwhile is super important.
So the relationships are there, and it's an interesting one for a lot of people that make that mistake when they're moving from peers and often become a peers manager, for example, that to go for respect, to go for trust, to go for integrity and result, but not necessarily friendship. I think the danger is when we try to be liked, it can manifest a lot of problems.
No, and I have had circumstances in my career when I moved from being a peer to a leader at quite a senior level, and then having to basically not fire that person who was a peer, but take their job away. Yeah. And that was
good lessons.
That's hard. That is really hard. But you have. The point was, the really crucial thing was that job had to go, and it wasn't a personal thing, and it wasn't but that was the right business decision. So you've got to leave yourself, in a space where you can do that.
That makes it a lot harder if there's a stronger friendship.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you've already touched on a little bit about developing leaders at every level. Is there anything else about how you get both up and top-down communication? One of the things we talk about in human enterprise is the job of the leader is to develop leaders at every level. Now, and some businesses make the mistake of thinking, well, as long as we've got a great senior team, we'll be right. For some reason, or not for some reason, for a lot of reasons, Lion Nathan has a massive emphasis on leadership at every level. Tell us a bit more about that.
Look, so we do, and I think you do want leaders at every level, but I think you need to differentiate what leaders at every level do.
Yep.
The people at the top of an organisation, they're there for a reason. They're there to make the big strategic calls, determine where that business is going to go, how it's going to differentiate itself, how it's going to focus on things that are going to succeed. That is the role and the purpose of senior people. And frankly, the organisation looks up to them and expects them to do that. Where I think you engage the leaders is, okay, what's their role in the execution of that strategy? Yeah. Sure, I'm interested in their points of view, I'm interested in their contribution, what have you, but at the end of the day, that buck does stop in my office.
Yeah.
If the business doesn't have a clear, concise, well-articulated, well-resourced strategy, that's my responsibility. I can't delegate that to the organisation. What I can delegate to the organisation and create is an environment where everybody understands those choices and understands the role that they're playing, and doing their best to make decisions, allocate resources, set priorities, build capability to drive towards their
leads in the execution of that.
And leads in the execution of what they're doing to contribute to that overall strategy.
I think it was you that first introduced me to the term EQ, not meaning emotional intelligence, but execution intelligence.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think, I actually think the process of developing strategy is complex and demanding, but it ain't anywhere near as hard as the execution piece. That's really tough.
That's where it happens.
And alignment and integration of your organisation behind a strategy is really crucial.
So you talked about I guess, setting strategy, setting direction, and that means that you have to get inputs from every level. How do you stay on top of your game? You've talked about role models and you've talked about things outside of work, but in terms of leadership, are you in any associations? Who do you hang around with? How do you get your input?
First, I try and get lots of feedback from the organisation, both from a results point of view, just the a real discipline around monitoring results, which is feedback about is what we're doing working and where we've got to change. Getting feedback from the people I work with, and we do have quite formal processes for that, but I actively go and engage with people around that as well. I am involved in a number of, in fact, I'm on the boards of I think 3 different industry associations, and I get a lot from that because of the types of issues that I'm dealing with, the types of people that I'm mixing with in those circumstances. So I learn a lot from that, particularly about the external environment and different perspectives, different opinions. Being in alcohol, there's a lot of stuff goes on around community and legislation and government. A lot of concerns about alcohol misuse and abuse and these sorts of issues. So they're really interesting issues to engage in. They're really crucial to the business, but they're also quite demanding and complex. So they give you a really good get outside the business and look back in type of perspective, and the sort of people you mix and deal with in those circumstances are really valuable from their perspective as well.
So 3 things I'm picking up are being constantly open to feedback personally, and also having systems in place to get it, having an external in-looking process rather than just in-out, where you've got industry contacts and all the rest of it. And the third thing that you talked about earlier is just looking for development and new pathways, neural pathways, new ways of thinking outside of your game.
Yeah.
So you're in the top role. Any top role can be very demanding at times, both in terms of energy and in terms of people wanting your time. How do you maintain a decent work-life balance? I know how important family is to you, and I know sometimes you can be dragged away from family a lot. I know you're going to Hong Kong this afternoon, for example. So how do you do that? How do you consciously do that?
Look, I would say that I reckon I do it better these days than I did do it, and I think the thing that I learnt was that you actually have to actively plan for it. And that sounds overly disciplined, and frankly doesn't suit me necessarily. But if you don't make the time for those things outside of your work, you will just become defined by your work. And one day that goes away, and there'll be nothing left.
Are you getting any 10s, Andrew, in your life?
That's right. So, and I started to, and say it was a bit of an epiphany moment some years ago. I thought, I don't want to just be defined by my work. I want to be defined by some other things. And I started thinking about, well, what are the great holidays I'd like to take? What are the interests I'd like to develop other than just work for the mind and for the body? And I actively went out and sought those things. So, I really started worrying about my physical fitness, worried about, taking up scuba diving and getting back into riding the surfboard, planning holidays, and I've done some great holidays over the last number of years with Jan, and where we've pursued some of these interests in art and those sorts of things. It's been
so. What's the message? People say, I just don't have enough time. I mean, you've deliberately set out to plan it.
I got a very busy job. I travel a lot. I mean, today I'm sure that everyone listening to this has got Blackberries and computers and what have you. We're barraged by information, what have you. But if you can make time for a meeting with someone in the business or someone outside the business, you can make time to go to the gym. You can make time to go to that course midweek.
Yeah.
You can find the time to take your leave. You can set aside the weekend. You just have to treat it like all the other things you do in your professional life. You block out the time. You say that time's for me, and you treat it seriously.
This is such a great lesson for our listeners.
It is, and look, it's taken me a lot of years to do it, because I used to do that. There was a time I did that, but I would treat that time as discretionary. It was a bit of a contingency plan. So, okay, that time I set aside for me can now be sort of filled up by work stuff. Right. Now I say, no.
It's sacred.
It's sacred. I go through my diary, my PA knows about it. There are blocks in there what I'm using for time for me, and it is sacred. I get my job done, and no question about that. I'm no less committed, no less enthusiastic, no less responsible about what I do.
I would probably say more enthusiastic, more responsible, and more energy as a result of it.
Yeah, I think, again, physically I'm in better shape than I've probably been for a long time. Mentally I'm stimulated.
Any 360s on the board lately?
Yeah, I've had it. Well, yeah, we have actually. Yeah, and in fact, I've got some really great feedback.
I meant the surfboard, by the way.
I was thinking about the internal board. Yeah.
So, talking about getting some great feedback, you've talked about a lot of what you do as a leader, and you've also talked about how you seek feedback. Hopefully, people have been able to point out some of the vulnerabilities. So it's a fairly personal question, and I'm just wondering though, what are some of your vulnerabilities as a leader? We find the great leaders know those, and then they compensate in some way for them.
There's no question about that. Something you helped me learn. You know, I'm not particularly good at politics. I don't understand why people don't sometimes just see why things aren't the way they
tell it as it is.
Tell it like it is, and so that gets me into trouble. Not so much trouble. I don't think I'm rude or abrasive, but I just do struggle sometimes to understand why people aren't seeing the world like I'm seeing it. So I've had to learn to stand in other people's shoes with the advice I've given to other people at different times. And I'm very passionate about my own agenda, and I think sometimes I've pushed that agenda without necessarily understanding its impact on other people or other people needing to get things done.
So what do you do now that's different as a result of that awareness? How have you compensated for that?
I think whereas I once would have just walked into a situation or circumstance and said, here's my agenda, this is what we're going to do, let's get on with it, that's what you paid me for, that sort of thing. I'll tend to have that in my mind. I'll certainly be clear about what it is I think I want to do, but I'll now allow time to take on board other issues before I launch into, okay, this is what we're going to do. I think it's a matter of it's an awareness of what's going on around you, more sensitivity to other people's issues, and frankly, it's been better because I've got a better outcome because those people then say, okay, well, by working this together, it's going to achieve both our ends. And frankly, I've opened my mind up, and I've got new ideas and new thoughts and new perspectives that have caused me to think, oh, there's a better way to do this.
So this is a very fascinating point. The reason why you would come in, as you used to say, this is what I have to do, this is my outcome, because you wanted a result and you wanted it quick.
Yeah.
It seems to me that by stepping back, getting more input, getting more involvement, seeing a bigger picture, you probably got a better outcome and much more quickly.
I got a better outcome and probably had better alliances, better relationships with people as a result of it.
Yeah, and not just for that particular issue, but the next one as well. So let's go. We talked about seeing things a little bit broader. Let's go a little bit broad now. We're in a new reality, a new economic reality in 2009 here, early 2009. What do you see as, not so much the business issues, but what do you see as some of the leadership challenges for business, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, and possibly if you wish to comment globally as well? What I'm looking at here, are there some lessons for leaders in our current economic times?
Yeah, I think there's a great lesson. It will end. and
now there's hope.
Well, it will, and the advantage of working over 30 odd years is that you've been through cycles. And you at least got the confidence to know that they are difficult and there are difficult times and they're very challenging, but they do come to an end. And there's a lot of people in this organisation, many organisations, who've maybe started their work life 15 years ago, who've never seen a difficult time.
Yeah.
And it's important for them to understand that, yeah, it's difficult, but it will end. And for me, I think the crucial issue is, where will we be when it ends? Where will we be positioned when this cycle comes to an end? And I think that fortunately we're in a business that has made good and smart investments in its sustainability, and we're in a pretty good place right now, even though the external world is difficult, and hopefully that'll stay that way. So it's really crucial, I think, to make sure that we just don't forget all the good investments we've made in brands and in infrastructure and in people, but we try and keep those going so that when this cycle does end, we're in good shape.
I'm reminded of the Second World War, where one of our clients is Unilever, where Lord Lever continued to advertise right through the war with a similar feeling, saying at one day this will end, and if nothing else, they'll know who we are and what our products are. And the business went enormously after those years.
And as difficult as the external environment is, people are still buying our brands. People are still engaged with them, and that, going back to something we talked about before, I want to maintain that loyalty. And you're not loyal if you just bugger off when the first sign of trouble.
This is a brilliant message to leaders out there. This will end. The question is, where will you be when it ends?
Yeah.
Will your capability be stronger?
Yeah.
Will your people be stronger? The very things you talked about.
So how we'll have to make changes. We'll have to adjust, I'm sure, through this cycle, and that's natural and probably healthy. But how do we not lose the essence of what makes us strong in that process?
Yeah. And what are some of the, drilling it down a little bit, what are some of the qualities of leaders that you think will be required even more so in these current times?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, absolutely clear strategy. These difficult times is where you really need a clear strategy and clear choices and clear direction. Because in the good times you can make mistakes and there's a lot of buffers around you and you can probably get away with it. The marketplace, the environment is far less forgiving at the moment. And for public listed companies, any small bit of bad news gets massively amplified. Look at the swings and the gyrations in share prices. So external world marketplaces are very intolerant at the moment. So being really clear about what you're doing and sticking to that is really crucial to navigate through the difficult times. I think that people capability is absolutely crucial through this whole period. Don't back off that. Because again, in the end of the day,
are you cutting down on any training?
No, we're not at all. In fact, we're making really active choices about keeping it going. Because again, we can see that our success as a business has been largely built on the strength and quality.
As a training and development consultant, this is excellent news.
Yeah.
More hope.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing. It's too easy to see those things as discretionary when they are really a part of what your success is built on.
Yeah.
And so we have got a good culture in this organisation, and we don't just want to be a culture that's a product of a good time. We want to be a culture that sustains us through difficult times.
In fact, come out. I love the point of where will we be when this ends. So. A huge career with many lessons along, starting to bring it together now. If you had one piece of advice or pearl of wisdom to give someone looking back at your career, what would it be as a leader? What would be that pearl, absolute pearl? I know it's so much there, but
I wish
it's like your strategic choices now.
Yeah, well, it is about, actually my pearl would probably be related to strategic choice. I think one of the big lessons I have learned is being really clear about what it is makes your business different, special, better, and really focusing on those strengths and just pouring all your energy and all your resources and all your efforts into making those things stronger, better, more valuable to your consumers, to your customers, to your people, yes, you've got to adjust and you've got to adapt and you'll be flexible, but every business will have those things in it, and I think to know what they are, to identify them and to focus on them is really crucial. The other thing I'd say is that visions and strategies are great, but you absolutely have to have a really clear execution and capability plan to make them come to life. Otherwise, they're just apparitions and dreams that will initially motivate people, but will soon become the thing that demoralises and destroys them, because they'll be enthused about going to where you're sort of painting a picture to go to, but you won't have a road to get them there.
I've heard it best expressed: the visions of greatness without a plan are the beginning of delusion. So there's many leaders that sometimes.
And I think visions. I'm not a big fan of visions, frankly, and I think visions are at best a headline for the main story, which is the strategy. And that's great. But if you don't have the strategy, the capability, the plan underneath it, then you're wasting your time.
And the strategy is, of course, the top line of the plan.
And it's about where's my big choices about how I'm going to succeed and differentiate and compete in this marketplace.
So on the concept of choices in business, we get to the concept of choices with the individual, and that is what do you want to be known for? What's the legacy you wish to leave behind as a leader? And I also know you're involved in leadership outside of work, in social and community situations as well. But if there was a legacy that you would be like to known for or leave behind, what would it be?
Two things. I think I want to answer it this way. I think probably the best way to judge a leader's effectiveness is a couple of years after they've left the job.
Right.
Because that means that they have done a great job leaving behind a really sustainable platform. So they've made good strategic choices, they've made good investments in the business, and those things will recur and sustain the business over a period of time. So sustainability of the business model, I think, is a crucial thing. But to me, the thing I'm most I'd be most proud of and get the most joy out of in work is people. And so I'd like to, look back on my career and the jobs that I've had and say, did I have an impact on some people? Did I help contribute, provide opportunity for people to really meet their potential to be as good as they can be? And because I think if you do that, you'll get the first one right. You've got great people, highly motivated, really good at what they do, enthusiastic about it, committed to it. They'll create great businesses. They'll determine the great strategies. They'll know where to focus and to put the energy and the effort. So to me, the legacy I'd focus on would be
people.
What have I left behind in terms of the quality of people?
Same pattern, but two different things. Have I left the business better than I found it in terms of long-term sustainability? And have I left people better than I found them? Are they better leaders and better people for it? Andrew, some great stuff there. Is there any final lessons on leadership that you'd like to, questions we haven't asked you that you'd like to leave for our listeners?
The one thing I say when I talk to these leadership groups we have in the organisation, I try and impart some experience, what have you. And I think one of the most demanding elements of leadership is the expectations people have of you as a leader. And I have to say I found that quite burdensome early on. Took it personally. A lot of the time, I think people will judge you by a standard as a leader. They won't judge themselves by. If you get put into a leadership position, a big senior job,
there's a lot of shoulds, isn't it?
There's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacks or people who've got all sorts of ideas of how you should have done things and what you should have done, and there's a hell of a burden of expectation with leadership, and you have to know that that's there. You have to be comfortable that that's there. And ultimately, you have to develop your own confidence and self-assurance that you can come up with plans, strategies, outcomes that you can be proud of and will deliver what people need and what's expected of you. But that's the expectation. The burden of expectation on leadership, I think, is probably one of the most demanding things I've had to come to.
So how do you handle it? I mean, there must be all these eyes looking at you and so forth. How do you now handle it? Because there must have been a change there for you.
Look, I think the confidence that comes with success and with achievement and with finally, the early fledgling steps you have, and you take a chance, you put a strategy in place, you put someone in a job, you make an investment somewhere and it pays off. You build on those little successes, and each one of those you learn from. Each one of those helps you understand what builds to doing something right, and it's confidence. You just move to that.
And as you get confidence, the business does too. I think Macquarie Bank talk about institutional confidence, and one of the things that I guess makes this business so confident, does it still have the higher purpose of
making the world
a more sociable place?
Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, it's a really good one, and I'll give you a quick example of where it might work in an odd way. But that has really shaped a lot of our thinking about how we deal with a lot of the community concerns about alcohol misuse and abuse. Because alcohol misuse and abuse is not about sociability. And if alcohol is used properly, enjoyably and responsibly, it creates a really sociable place and hopefully helps make our world a bit more enjoyable. When it is misused and abused, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable, it's frightening, it can be scary, it can be dangerous, and that's not sociable. So we've used that mantra a lot in how we've framed our response to legislation, to investments in community programs, into how we design our products.
I think that great note to end on. Andrew, you've certainly made my world a more sociable place. I know you've made the world here a more sociable place, and I know with a lot of the stuff you do outside of work, you've made it not just a more sociable place, but a great place to be. And so thank you very much for participating in the Human Enterprise Transformational Leadership Series, and I wish you a great trip to Hong Kong.
It's a great pleasure, Paul. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, there's certainly some great insights there from Andrew about strategy, about capability and people, and of course the absolute importance of managing your own energy levels as a leader. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode of the Transformational Leadership Interview Series. If you have any questions or comments, or perhaps you'd like to make a suggestion as to who we could interview, then get in contact with us via our website at www.thehumanenterprise.com.au. I wish you all the best in your own leadership journey. This is Paul Mitchell, Managing Director of the Human Enterprise.